Got it. Pause.
Put on my clothes. I've got to do all this work. And then he starts to leave. And then her heart is stirred again. So, I see that, and that, I'm wondering when her heart is open, when she's vulnerable, that's the only time that she can be struck and bruised. Like, I'm just, so it just was saying to me something about, something about the relationship is one, of both head and heart. And that's,
Yeah, I think that absolutely can be a part of our understanding of this, right? And what happens when you don't treat it as a whole and you treat it as two separate pieces and neglect one over the other. Yeah, absolutely. I think it can be taken in that way as well. And I think the rabbis would say yes. And in the same way that Sarah, you suggested that they could be, messenger instructed to punish rather than a natural consequence. I think that's another reading of it as well. And again, the irony of a guardian or a guard being a source of pain and suffering, right? Instead, right? So there was a second thing, Sarah, and then you'll pass. Okay, all right. So I want to, if it's okay, I want to move on to the next text because we've gone through time here. In the interest of making sure that everybody on Zoom can hear as well, and it's harder because y'all are a little bit farther away from the microphone, I'm going to read this section from the Zohar. The Zohar is the core text for Jewish mysticism, for the mystical interpretation of Torah. And Torah, not just 5 books of Moses Torah, but really up to a point the totality of Jewish experience and literature. It was attributed to Shimon Bar Yochai, but probably written much later than that. So it's pseudo pekufa in that sense. But it is, again, a tremendously rich text and a very difficult text to read in the original, and even more difficult text to read in translation, right? So if you struggled a bit with this, you're not alone. And so here it's, so Rabbi Chia Bar Rabba, right, went to the masters of the Mishnah to learn from them. And so this is Yehuda Nasi, the prince, and he went to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, again, the ascribed author of this work, and saw a curtain of fire that divided the house. And Rabbi Shimon and his students were in the inside of the curtain. Rabbi Chia was mystified and said, I will hear a word from his mouth from here, from outside the fiery curtain. That is from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right, the teacher. He heard the voice of one of the students of Rabbi Shimon, who said, make haste, my beloved, and be you like a gazelle or a young hart. And so this is a comment on this is a passage from Song of Songs, not from the section that we just read, a little bit later on, chapter 8. All the longings that Israel had for the blessed Holy One, whereas Rabbi Shimon said, the desire of Israel is that the blessed Holy One should not distance, but rather, not distance God's self, but rather run like a gazelle or a young deer. What does that mean? Rabbi Shimon said, what is the reason for this, right? There is no animal in the world who does as the gazelle or the young deer, which when it flees, goes a measure, a distance, and turns its head to the place whence it left. It always turns its head backwards. So did Israel say, Master of the universe, if we cause that you ascend from us, let it be your desire that you shall flee like a gazelle or young deer who flees and turns its head to the place that it left, right? So if we chase you away, don't just run, right? I'm thinking of you, Jody, and all you've taught us about our puppy, and right, that our dog will run, stop, and check in, right? And you say, good check, and then the dog continues, right? So it's not entirely true that the gazelle or the deer is the only one who does this. Only dogs trained by Jody Haas Wolfson. Those are the only, right? No, but it's that idea. Don't just run, right? Check in on us. Check in on us, right? In this way. This is what is written. So adding more to this a young gazelle or a hart or a deer, right? And yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor will I abhor them to destroy them utterly. This is the quotation from Leviticus. So another explanation is that the deer sleeps with one eye while the other eye is awake. So did Israel say to the Blessed Holy One, do as the deer. For see, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. That's a quotation from Psalm 121, that Esai, I lift up my eyes to the heavens, right? So here in this beautiful passage, right, it's a sense of recognition that we know we're going to do stuff that's going to chase you away. That's kind of how we're wired. We're going to mess up. We're going to sin. We're not going to follow the Torah's instructions. And we already know you're going to want to distance yourself from us. But check in on us. Show us that you're not truly running away, right? It's just for this time. I can't be with you right now, right? And I need to walk away. But I'm going to check in on you, right? I know I've done this with my children, right? And, they just, I can't deal with you right now. I'm going to walk away. I will come back, I'll check in, right? And when they were little, I'd sneak around and look in their bedroom and other, but that's kind of what we're hoping here, what the Zohar is describing as that experience of God. So that it is a chasing away, but it's not in its entirety, right? It's not a final thing, a final exit, excuse me, what I was looking for, of God. Okay. Questions, comments, rebuttals? Right. So there were questions that were included in with this, and did any of those questions speak to you? And we would like to share, respond to those questions as well.
Sure, we have a
So go ahead, Jody. I'm sorry,
I think the delta here is that when you flee, you don't have the time nor the desire to look back, because all of your energy, if you will, is focused on this ability to get away from. But when you're running, they're not fleeing. The animals that he quoted here aren't fleeing as we don't flee from God. We may run away, but it isn't the reason that we turn back, and God turns back. Both is that there is this establishment. Are you really still there? I need you to still be there. Even if I can't be there, you need to be there.
Yeah.
And so it's a very different point of view to have a fleeing response that's flight. Versus a running event, which is, oh my God, look at this, let's just run, this is who I am, and I really need to feel free, but, oh, wait a second, let me do this.
Right. So the fleeing doesn't necessarily mean, if I'm understanding, right, doesn't necessarily mean trying to escape from, right? Sometimes it's distraction. Oh, I saw something shiny over there, I'm going to run towards that, right? And that might be, the idolatry piece coming in, right?
Yes.
That, I'm running towards that, but checking in, right? And remembering, oh yeah, I've got this over here, I've got God over here, and that it's not, and I don't know that the text is talking about a flight from fear or a fear motivated flight. Although there may be some of that in this as well, where sometimes we might be afraid of getting too close or getting too involved with God, right, in that way. And that might be a part of that, again, that kind of push-pull, that struggle that between intimacy and distance, right? That can be a fear. Being too close can be a fearful thing as well. And sometimes we run from that. And then check back in because we realize it probably wasn't the best decision to just run off and not
Right, and
look
then
back.
there's also the issue that, my father's words come back to me so clearly, there are no non-believers in the foxhole.
Mhm.
Okay, you find yourself in a circumstance where looking back is all you have.
Yeah.
To keep you moving forward. Because otherwise the uncertainty is overwhelming and you can't make sense of that either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it speaks to that aspect of it.
Yeah, and there are moments when we please God help me through this, and I will, and then fill in the blank,
Right.
But whether it's in a foxhole or in a difficult situation or getting hit with a pop quiz, right? I mean, in those moments when our first thought is, please God, be there for me in this moment, and that's our turning back and looking towards, and the image here is, of course, that God does the same thing, kind of hoping, well, are they still there? No? Okay. Yes? Okay, good. And keep, right? And so how does this fit for you, right? In that sense, is this a helpful image, a helpful metaphor, imagining either of these two animals or that kind of phenomenon? And then Francie.
I was wondering, could it also potentially be that in this image of God running right to the zero, of giving humans space to grow and become who it is that they are, and to allow that to happen, and then look back?
Yes, and I think again, for the Zohar, particularly in this passage, it's not look back and then come to me,
No.
right? Or look back and stop and wait for me to catch up, right? There's something about that running and turning and running and turning and checking in and running some more. And so that it's interesting in this passage from Zohar that the request is not to stop or return, and not to keep both eyes open, right? One eye is good enough, right? If we know that you're looking at us with one eye and then the other eye you're sleeping, okay. I don't know that deers actually do that. I think it's just it's just that passage that they wanted to use that proof text from Psalm 121, right? And neither slumbers nor sleeps. And they're saying, well, neither slumbers nor sleeps. No, you got to sleep, slumber. You got to do that at some point.
After your
and
brain
right.
sleeps at a time.
yeah,
Is
yeah.
the explanation scientifically.
So yeah, so it's again very anthropomorphic, or this, in this particular passage focused on being more animal centric in the image, but imagining God in that way, right, Francie?
I was just thinking about the one eye open, one
Yeah.
eye closed as parents of teenagers or young adults, I think, do that. That wasn't what I was really going to say. But I was thinking about the question here, what happens, how do you feel if God has abandoned you?
Yeah,
And I mean, that's a tricky one, because I think there's places where you can go, which is, oh, I'll solve the problem, or I feel angry, or, something kind of logical like that. But maybe even just building on what Aline said, is that, if you sit and you sit with the questions, is God doing that thing, running, turning back, or what is happening really? That's a very useful place to be, but it's not that comfortable
yeah,
necessarily.
right. And I think, thank you. And I think that's really part of the power of this text, is living with that discomfort, right? That and accepting that there's going to be this distance, right? And that's a part of faith too, for at least for the rabbis of the Zohar, and for those looking at it, that's part of how we experience faith, how we experience God. And as you were talking about the one eye open and one eye closed, and being a parent, it's like, the spidey senses, right? So even though you're sleeping, I'm sure you found this, I certainly found this as well, that in the middle of the night, I'm wide awake for a reason that I don't immediately understand until I go investigate and understand that's why I woke up. That's why I was disturbed from my sleep. I had this remarkable, I led a trip to Israel with 45 16-year-olds. I was 26. I was the adult, right? And just we were at a dormitory, and I was asleep in my room, and all of a sudden I woke up, and I went and I was investigating, and it turns out one of the girls had gotten very, very sick in the middle of the night. Well, it turned out she was dehydrated. But she was throwing up, and her roommates were trying to help her, but nobody had thought to come get me. So I thought, wow, this spidey sense gets activated very quickly, and it doesn't have to be your own child that it's responding to. And I think that one eye open, I felt like I was sleeping with one eye open, even though both eyes were closed when I was sleeping. But it's interesting, that sense of also that God, it's not literally one eye open, one eye closed, but that, God is aware. And again, this idea of God, even in part being exhausted or tired, right? Having, similar to that first text, right? That God is exhausted from pounding on the door and waiting. That distance is hard for God too, right? Which is an interesting idea to go into faith. And again, very anthropocentric, but ascribing to God the feelings that we have as well, right? In that sense, and the understanding of what that can mean. And yes, it's exhausting. And part of the reason it's so exhausting is because it's so important and so powerful, right, for us. Good. Yeah, Sarah.
It reminds me of my mother. She always said, and when I was young, I really thought, what you say, now just remember, I have eyes in the back of my head.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember one time I said, well, but are you blind? I said that to her. And she said, well, let's just keep it this way. Remember the eyes in the back of my head. And in a way, it was actually kind of nice to know.
Yeah.
Because I knew that she was always there. And
Yeah.
watching
Yeah,
and aware. And it also kept me in line.
yeah,
So maybe if, you know, you think of God, it's always, even though he pulls back, there is maybe an element that is always, even in times of crisis, doesn't seem to be there. Those were the questions.
Yeah.
Those were the
Yeah.
questions.
yeah. And in my case, it saved this girl's life, right? I mean, in a quite literal way, that I had that sense and that ability to just be there when I didn't even know I needed to be there in that moment, right? And so it's that it's right, the all watching, all seeing doesn't need to be the frightening thing. It's actually the comforting thing. And so it's not necessarily the threat. It's that comfort, that sense that yes, God is present. God is present. And I don't always know that, right? You didn't always see your mother looking at you from the back of her head. But she knew, right? And so the kids say this to Kathy, is, you know, you always find out. You always find out. And she does. She always found out. Much quicker than I did. I mean, I was oblivious. But yeah, Phyllis, and then Deb.
Just a quick notion that as I read this, I think about Rabbi Simon.
Yep.
Creating a partnership with something that they don't quite understand. And that's what I've always felt is, or, I don't know, that's my imagery of this God, whatever God is kind of a mental partnership, saying there is something out there helping me to understand my actions and what I need to be doing, and it's there.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if everybody heard that, but it's that struggling without being able to describe or to grasp really, right? And not even and in this the request is not to see God or grasp God. It's just, please God, you know, can we imagine it you this way? You know, we want you to always have an eye on us, right? To be on with us, and to see that again is a very positive thing, right? Yeah, they're not giving an answer here, right? And it's interesting that even the one who wants to learn is still separated by this fire, right? So it doesn't even have direct access to the teacher. And in fact, it's the student's voice that this rabbi hears from beyond that firewall, right? So it's already, there's an even greater sense of mystery, right? Because he can't even see the teacher and the students. He sees the wall of fire. He can hear, but he doesn't necessarily hear the teacher, he hears the student, right? And so I think for us, it's again embracing that doubt and that the mystery, the inability to have the kind of access that we would want to have, right? I mean, this student would really rather be with Rabbi Shimon. That's where he wants to be, on the other side of the fire, and really being able to participate in the learning and in the connection, right? But feeling, not despairing of the inability to do that, right? Still remaining engaged in that way. And I think for me, that's very powerful, that it's, you know, sometimes you have to be satisfied with just kind of the echo of a hint of a something, right? And that's enough to energize that sense of faith and connection. That doesn't have to be that direct, empirical, unambiguous connection with God that is described so beautifully in the first books of the Bible, that we just don't have that same access too, right? Okay. Deb, I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, just going to say that this passage reminded me a little of the podcast.
Yeah.
The scholar, the woman who was talking about how important it is for her, she sees God as a witness. And I was thinking, listening to everybody talking about their parents and their experiences. I mean, as a witness, God is there when you need, when you want to summon, when you feel the need, as well as when you don't realize, like the girls who, didn't realize that they needed protection.
Yeah.
So as a witness, God can recognize when we don't see that we need intervention. It's not only when we need strength, guidance, and we see it, but also when our world needs intervention.
Yeah.
And we don't recognize it.
And that notion of witness and the way that, so again, for those on Zoom, Deb was referencing the podcast and Alina Stein-Hagen talking about needing God as witness or seeing God as witness. And it's a bit counterintuitive because we're supposed to be the witnesses of God's presence, right? At least that's the guidance of the normative Jewish tradition in looking at this. And I thought immediately as she was talking in the podcast, and now Deb, as you're drawing us back to it, of the way that the verse, the Shema, is written in Torah, that the ayin of the first word, Shema, is larger, and the dalet of the last word, echad, is larger. And putting the rabbis talk about putting the ayin and the dalet together to create the word aid, which is Hebrew for witness. And that we proclaim the Shema, we are bearing witness to God's presence, right? To the existence of God, God's presence, the oneness or the singularity of God in that way. And for Alina Stein-Hagen, she states it in kind of the opposite, that she needs God to be her witness in this. And it's a very, to me, I call that a big brain concept. It's hard for me to understand how to experience that God as witness. Because to me also, witness is more of a passive experience. And so I'm not sure that for me, in my faith, that it's enough to think that God is simply bearing witness to the creation and what's going on in the creation. But for her, it's critical, right, in her faith. And that's the beauty of it. There isn't just one way to express it. And each of these texts gives a different pathway to faith, right, in this. Yeah, Aline.
I see witness as much more profound than that, because if someone has the capacity to be a true witness, to me, that means they really get it.
Great.
They really know who I am, that there's a connection.
Mm-hmm.
If one is paying attention in their role as a witness.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the same thing that Ilana is feeling, that Alina Stein-Hagen in this podcast, in this conversation, is thinking about when she talks about needing God to be witness, to have that care and concern, and that connection or that understanding of who I am. Yeah, good. Yeah, Sarah?
When I think of Shema, I think of us being the witnesses, because Shema.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not instead of God being the witness.
Yeah. No, that's what I meant. That's in the normative tradition, it's we who are required to be the witness,
Right.
not God.
Listen.
And this flips the script,
Okay.
right? So what Ilana is saying and what Aline just amplified is, and Deb, that it's needing that God to be the witness and to have that care and that concern, and to not to be, but to understand that God is witness, right?
So
And
both ways. saying.
It can be, but the way she articulates it, it's not a necessary, right? It's not, one is not dependent on the other, right? It's not, if you do this, then I will. But it's that ever-present witness, for better or for worse, right? I mean, if God really knows me, God really knows me and knows everything about me, the good stuff and the really deep, dark, nasty stuff, right? And that can be scary, comforting and frightening, right? Comforting and frightening. And to me, that's part of this overall message of what it means to be a person of faith, that, it can be overwhelming, it can be frightening, right? Despair can be a part of it. Doubt, absolutely, right, in this. Yeah. Let's move to the next text, okay? So we're going to move from the Zohar to Zelda, from Z to Z. And we just have this very short passage. For those who don't know, Zelda she's no longer with us, was a 20th century Israeli poet. We're reading this in translation. Her poetry won praise for the ways in which it blended the modern with the ancient and the religious with the secular, right? Together. So this quotation captures a different aspect of the dynamic of the relationship that is described in Song of Songs, right? This sense of romantic love. Faith is not something that is or is not. It is not absent or present. Faith is something that is constantly renewed. And moreover, faith is not something that should sit unexamined as though it's a foregone and permanent conclusion. And this approach undergirds the entire, everything that we really, the text from last week and from the previous 3 weeks as well. That the notion that faith is dynamic, right? It's not static, right? So it gives further strength to that idea. So in looking at this, so I'm going to read it first in the Hebrew, if that's okay, just so you get a sense of the cadence and the sound of it, and then in English. Yesh mi shechoshev ki im ha'adam hu dati, hare emunato kemunachat b'kufsa, ve'ein mevinim ki yom yom tzarich hama'amin lechadesh et emunato. There are those who think that if a person is religious, then their faith, as it were, sits in a box. They do not understand that every single day, yom yom, the believer must renew their faith.
What is the translation of the word dati?
Here, the translation.
This is religious, but is it more than that?
Well, I think it has a multiplicity of meanings, right? Because she's living and writing in Israel, in the state of Israel. So dati for her has a very specific connotation. She imagines there are those who look at these people dressed in black with the long beards and the women with the wigs and the whole business as, people who've got it all set, right? Their faith is set. No doubt, no questioning, no effort, nothing. I know who I am. I know who God is. I know what my relationship is. I'm good, right? And that's wrong. Don't assume that somebody who's dressed a particular way or lives a particular way of life, that their faith is static, that it doesn't need to be renewed, that every day faith has to be renewed. Regardless of their level of observance, right? That doesn't matter. It's for everyone, right?
Yeah, and that's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
That's what I was asking. But it brought to mind, I had a professor at HUC, Jerry Buber, who said he was being questioned one day by Orthodox Jews as to how Jewish was he. And his response was, well, how many times a day do you, oh, no, they were claiming they were more Jewish than him. And his response is, well, how many times a day do you Jew? Which sort of ended the subject with them. But it's that, to me, and it goes back to what the question you raised at services, the difference between rote learning and Socratic or experiential learning. And to me, the Socratic and experiential learning stays with you longer. Whereas the rote learning is surface.
Yeah.
And it's an experience every day of learning and relearning that shapes us.
Yes, and I think especially this is an idea that has been foundational for Jewish learning, for Jewish study, that, you know, to the point where they say, you know, when two people get together to study, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests between them, right? So in that very act of learning, that dynamic of, you know, the arguing back and forth, and I use that in a positive sense, right? It's not arguing negative, it's the wrestling with, to derive meaning from whatever it is that you're studying, right? In that dynamic, the Shekhinah is there, right? And so for the rabbis, they imagined that was literally the presence of God, right? That was that. And for many people, and again, going back to the podcast from when Elias Hagen, you know, she finds, you know, that closeness to God, that feeling of God's presence comes through her study of text, right? And so that there are those aha moments, right? And those, you know, where it's, you know, this epiphany, right? With this, and literally this experience of God, right? This is exactly what the rabbis were talking about. And so, right, so keeping it in a box, you can't ever have that, right? And so you have to continue to rest. You have to renew it, right? And I love this the use of the word lechadesh, right? To renew, it's literally to make new, right? So it's not, so renewal is like a recommitment. I think of it differently than saying to make something new, to me, is different than renewing something, right? You can renew your driver's license, right? But to have that new experience is to have something different, right? And so the idea that faith is l'chadesh, right? L'chadesh et umanato, right? To make new their faith, right? I think would be with all modesty, that's how I would translate it, and not as renewal. Although I understand that too. I mean, there is a sense of renewal that's refreshing and good. So I'm not denigrating that element of it or saying that can't be a part of it too. Just like dati reflects a certain community, but it's also reflecting on, don't think that anybody, because of their level of practice or ritual, has it all figured out. Because they don't, right? And so you shouldn't feel less than, or feel like, you know, why can't I have it all locked up like these people do? Because they don't, right? In that sense, yeah.
And what do they do with the dump? That they
I'm sorry,
don't-
what do they do?
What do they do? They, meaning ultra orthodox or whatever.
Uh-huh.
What do they do with that doubt? Thank you for the word. How do you do this day after day after day after day after day and end up in the same place you started, which was doubt?
So I don't know that the alternatives are keeping faith in a box or doubting, right? I don't know that it's necessary, although that sometimes may be involved in that, and that's certainly embraced in these other texts, that the questioning and the doubting. But you can question without having the doubt, right? You know, questioning, okay, where are you, God? How can I better understand you? How can I better understand what you want of me? What I'm supposed to be doing? So it's not doubting God's existence that's necessary, although many of us, maybe most of us, do that, right, from time to time. But it's not, so lechadesh yom yom is not necessarily that you have to wrestle with your doubt every day. But you do have to renew every day. And sometimes that means, keep studying Torah, because, that's what you're supposed to do. That's the connection. You're always going to be able to wrestle new meaning from that old text, right? And that's the creative process, that's the dynamic process, that's the energy, that's the connection, right? So I think that's part of what Zelda is getting at here. So it's not, gosh, I think that, well, I'll stop there. Yeah. Go on.
Can renewal or come in relationships? Is that a demonstration to be, yes?
Yeah, I
Rather
think-
than doing Torah, can it come out in doing God's work, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, I think that's absolutely a part of it, which is why, let's take an example of prayer, right? You can certainly pray on your own. However, you're encouraged to pray as community, right? We need the minyan, right? You need to have at least 10 folks for many of the prayers of our worship service. You can still do it on your own, and there's a way to do it on your own, but it's better to be in community, right? One of the famous sayings attributed to Hillel is "Al tifrosh min hatzipor," don't separate yourself from the community, right? And because being in community is a critical part, and being community is a critical part of what it means to be a person of faith in Jewish tradition. That it's not, that it's the monastic and ascetic existence is not held up as something that you should do, right? Or not expected of you, right? And so even with the vows of the Nazarite, it was time bound. You could take on those vows to lead a particular way of life, not for years, but for months. That's the flip. Okay, let's get to the next text. I want to really get to the last two of these texts, and I see our time is moving along here. So the next text is the text, the story that Martin Buber. Oops, that's what I wanted to do. The text that Martin Buber brings forward, this Hasidic text about the Kotzker Rebbe. So many of you are familiar with Martin Buber, 20th century Jewish philosopher, originally from Austria, who his focus was really this philosophy of being in dialogue with God, right? And the idea of relationship, and very famously talked about I, thou, right? That you experience God when you experience the other as a thou rather than an object or an it, right? And that you have the opportunity to experience the thou with a capital T as a part of that relationship, right? Okay, so he was also a scholar of Jewish mysticism, and he was a collector of these Hasidic tales, and he's published tales, the tales of the Hasidim. I think there's volume 1, volume 2 of this as well. So, the description is what it means to be engaged in the hiding and the seeking relationship that we first were talking about with the Song of Songs text earlier. And so this is a great, so faith is your will to protect faith as something dear to you. I'll say it again. Faith is your will to protect faith as something dear to you. Right? So when people lose their faith, they first lose their will to protect their faith. If someone cares about their faith, I mean, that's key, that's critical. And and being faithful for Buber, and what he sees in this story is saying, I want to protect the space between me and God. Right? So not to close it up completely, where I feel, enveloped always in this ecstatic experience of God. It's neither desirable nor possible, but really also that it's about protecting that space, that distance as well, which again is a little bit counterintuitive, right? To what we would imagine. So the story, I just wanted to, there we go, right? So the chassid comes to the Kotzker Rebbe. Rabbi complained, I keep brooding and brooding. Okay? I don't seem to be able to stop. So the Kotzker asks, what do you brood about? I keep brooding about whether there really is a judgment and a judge. Din v'dayan, right? What does it matter to you, the Kotzker asks? Rabbi, if there's no judgment and no judge, then what does all creation mean? The Kotzker pushes again. What does that matter to you? Rabbi, if there's no judgment and no judge, then what do the words of the Torah mean? Kotzker pushes him even further. What does that matter to you? Rabbi, what does it matter to me? What does the rabbi think? What else could matter to me? Kotzker responds, well, if it matters to you as much as all that, then you are a good Jew after all. And it's quite all right for a good Jew to brood. Nothing can go wrong with him. So that's the Kotzker Rebbe. That's the tale that Buber shares. Questions, comments, observations? How does this sit with you? I brood, therefore I am faithful, right?
I think it's great. It's so Jewish.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the epitome of being Jewish. It's a question.
And I think that it informs the Zelda text, right? Or they're connected to what Zelda was saying. It's not, you can't have it in a box, right? That it is something that you should brood. I don't know if we should brood about it, but you should, if that's necessarily the word that we want to use to describe our wrestling and our struggle. But that this is something that's not only okay to do, it's encouraged. This is what we should be doing, and embracing that distance.
I think it also enforces that there's a reason rather than a random occurrence that we're here.
Right. And I think absolutely that there's what Phyllis said, that there's a reason, that there's a purpose involved here that is reflected in this brooding and the Kotzker's response, right? That if you care so deeply about this, that it bothers you, you're on the right track. You're on the right track. It should bother you. You should remain engaged. You should keep thinking about this. So let's go to the Nachmanides text as well, because it piggybacks onto this beautifully, right? So again, Nachmanides, not Maimonides, Nachmanides was a 13th century Spanish commentator. He was also a Kabbalist, a Jewish mystic, rabbi, philosopher, doctor. He was a major Jewish figure in the medieval period. Right? He was both, at one and the same time, a legalist and also a mystic, right? That they were not in contradiction, in combat. It's still not the word I'm looking for. At odds with, conflict, thank you, with one another, right? He sees doubt as part of the essence of faith. It's not a dichotomy and it's not heresy, right? Which is again kind of remarkable in the medieval ages. We're seeing this. Rebellion or doubt is not against faith, it's a part of faith. Which helps us understand a lot of the book of Numbers, where it's constant rebellion and reconnect for the children of Israel, right? So let me just read through this in the English, right? So he's he's commenting on Ecclesiastes, right? Which is, again, King Solomon in his old age, kind of despairing, but understanding it differently, right? Third subject, discernible, in Solomon's general comments on the vanities of this world, right? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity and striving after the wind is usually what we understand. And other than to everything, there is a season, turn, right? That the bird's made very, very famous. That's also from Ecclesiastes. Vanities of this world that he mentioned is the difficult problem that constitutes both the root of rebellion and the source of faith. It is a problem that has baffled the former and latter, that is learned people, we'll say not just men, of all nations and ethnic groups. It is the enigma of the righteous person who fares badly and the wicked person who fares well, right? Why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, right? And that it's, both source of, it's the root of, so rebellion and faith here are two sides of the same coin, the coin of faith. Which again is a pretty remarkable statement. And that, he's not, he doesn't presume to answer the question, right, of why the good suffer and why the wicked prosper. Right? And if he does offer an answer at all, it's simply that, this rebellion against your experience of the world is a very important part of your faith. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, right? And it's kind of, do you agree with this? Right? And that was one of the first questions, right? I mean, this is, to me, one of the more challenging of the 5 texts that we're looking at tonight is this Vanities text, and trying to understand exactly how does this play out today for us. Any thoughts, comments, reactions to this text? Yeah, Jody.
I think it's, to me, when I look at the other religions who certainly don't ascribe to this in any way, shape, or form, what it does is it creates validation on both sides, as the podcast lady, I forgot her name already.
Elana Steinhagen.
Sounded maybe disrespectful. She said her relationship with God is about the authentication and validity of her being. Why she is, every day, she has to go and look at that question. And in a funny way, if you don't make this so literal, isn't that what we do when there's the good people that are
Suffering.
versus the people who should definitely be sent to the island where all those other people are. So it is this transitional relationship. It's almost interstitial in that way. And I think that's what this is. It's not so much that we need an answer.
Yeah.
It is the fact that we need, asking the question alone is validating.
Yeah. And I think that, and Phyllis, I think that's what you were alluding to earlier as well. And I think when I was reading this text, I was thinking back to the Soloveitchik text, right? And talking about purpose, right? That part of this struggle is to help us figure out our purpose. What are we supposed to do in this moment, right? So when we see good people suffering, that's an opportunity to fulfill our purpose and to provide assistance, to provide aid. Good people had their lives either ended or completely upended by the tornadoes this past weekend, right? And were they bad people who deserve to have this happen to them? No. And on the other end, we see, people getting away with stuff and playing the system and gaming the system, and that's part of our purpose too. Is that let's figure out how to stop this, how to, hold people accountable, to have them experience consequences for their bad actions, right? So that's a part, I think that's what Nachmanides is talking about, the rebellion, right? That, yeah, we should be stirred up about this. That's part of being a person of faith. This stuff should rile you. The unfairness of things, good people suffering, bad people prospering, yeah, that should get you upset, and hopefully upset enough to do something about it, right? To put your faith into action. And I think that's what Nachmanides is getting. I think that's what Soloveitchik was talking about. Certainly, we can read into what Buber, if we extend it out from this one story of the Kutzker Rebbe. But I think that's an integral, important part of this. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to explore these texts, to explore these questions together. I didn't promise answers in describing this course, but the wrestling to this, and hopefully this has given you pieces of text of our tradition to encourage the feelings and the thoughts that you already have, and also to present you with new images, new metaphors, new ideas that can also be integrated and continue to be wrestled with. So this is not the end, although it's the end of this 5 sessions and this evening session. But again, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to explore these with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder that not this Shabbat, but the following 2 Shabbatot, we will not be in person, we'll be in Zoom. It's Erev Christmas and Erev New Year's. And so to give our folks here who, particularly with Erev Christmas, the opportunity to be with their families, we're going to do that. And to make it accessible to everyone. So, but the first Shabbat after that, which will be January 7th, thank you, we'll be back in person. Okay, and also available online too, but just a reminder. All right, thank you, have a great week, and a great, if I don't see you until the next year, have a great next year.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.